This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Confronting the Lying. Today I have with me one of my favorite people and I have like a crew of what I call resident experts in various areas. And today I have with me Ann Betz, who is an expert in the field of personal coaching. Got a lot of expertise in the world of transformation as well. Spent a few years there, and neuroscience. I'm in her advanced coaching neuroscience and transformation certification right now, which, by the way, folks, is a year long, which is one of the ways you know it's legitimate. Oh my gosh, Ann, as soon as I was like in your class, I started getting all these Facebook ads for neuroscience-based coaching certifications. And they're like, in one weekend, learn how to. I know, right? And I'm like texting Ann going, do you believe this? Holy cow. So yeah, folks, for the record, red flag, if somebody tells you they can teach you neuroscience or coaching in one weekend or 1 week or even one quarter, walk away. That alone is enough to tell you, or as a practitioner, that's not following safe and ethical practice.
I would agree.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm excited. I asked Ann to come on today. We're going to talk about a couple of things. I want to talk about just the world and the field of coaching and like how that intermixes with the seminar groups and programs and stuff that we talk about here on Confronting the Line. Before we jump in, Ann, anything you want to say by way of hello or letting our audience know any more about who you are?
I'm excited to have this conversation. I come out of the large group awareness training that was early in my life, so I have a lot of connection there, have done so many different things in the personal development field that this is really a passion to talk about it, unpack it. And I'm constantly saying, it's all about the line, like friend Ann would say, it's about confronting the line. So I talk about that a lot because I think that is just such a brilliant title, because we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say nothing matters, nothing works. No, a lot of stuff does. And then there's also harm and damage done. So we got to look at the line.
In class recently, we had a session, one of the lessons was about metaphors, right? The use of metaphors. What I've come to understand after almost 30 years in the personal and professional development industry world, right? So I'm 57. I've been participating since 27. I've been leading since I was 30 in some capacity or another, programs, leadership development, self-expression development, like all kinds of stuff. First of all, in these groups and organizations, you're taught that group's methodology only. And whether it's said directly or implied, it's very much part of the culture that whatever that ideology, doctrine, methodology, technology, whatever you want to call it, it really is the best. Even if they say it's not the only, but it's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. And this is what makes some of these groups culty, is this idea. And do I remember that from my days in Landmark. There was this idea that you are kind of the chosen people. If this is what you are doing, you are more enlightened, more clued in, it's really, to me, that's a big, big red flag when any organization, I don't care what you're teaching or what you're doing, is creating an us and them and a hierarchy, because there are so many paths back to wholeness that
right. And there's so many different things are needed in different times. I'll come back to my metaphor in just a sec. But I listened to one of my favorite books. This is a fun one. How to Stay Sexy and Not Get Murdered.
This is super familiar.
You read a lot of neuroscience. Read that one for fun. I actually listened to the Audible because the authors, it's two women that have this Murderino podcast, and they read their own book, and it's hilarious because at different points they go off on these tangents about what they wrote. So the Audible is particularly fun. And but one of the things that one of the gals in there talks about that I really appreciated was stop bothering your friends with what you should take to your therapist. And
and stop bothering your therapist with things you should take to your friends.
Right. Well, and that's one aspect of coaching. We can bookmark this for later, but sometimes people bring to you in a coaching environment what's better in a therapeutic environment, or they bring in a therapeutic environment what's better. But her thing is change therapists every once in a while.
Yeah.
because, you're going to work in a certain domain or discipline or looking, and then what you need is another one. I joke all the time. I have a spiritual teacher I work with, I have a coach that I work with, and I have a therapist. Actually, I have a whole cadre of therapists now.
A bunch of people.
Yeah.
Well, and what this makes me think of is this that oftentimes people are looking for what is the one thing for healing? Like, what's the perfect thing? Should I do psychedelics? Should I do EMDR? Should I
Should
do
I take that pill?
yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy? What is the answer? It's really been striking me more lately when I look at my own healing journey, both from being in something that really was a cult and at least at the level that I participated, as well as being involved with in a toxic relationship with a narcissist, that
Mm,
when I look at my own healing, it was so many different things. It was not one thing. It was acupuncture, it was cognitive behavioral work, it was good friends who loved me to pieces and hugged me and told me I was going to
uh,
be okay. It because trauma and abuse, wherever it comes from, impact does not just impact us cognitively. It impacts every aspect of who we are and our system and the systems around us. So, like I think about, we have to repair our social systems because often if we're leaving a high control group, that's one of the things we lose is we lose the feeling of family. So you can't heal unless you find some way to find a new family of
that's
that.
right. Right. Yeah, and it's a long and windy road, right? Like, it's not just this one thing. It's just it's a bit like grief. I've got a couple of friends that are, grief counselors and whatnot. I'll never forget I had one on as a guest in our women's circle just talking about grief. And one of the things that I learned in that talk was that grief isn't linear.
No.
You might jump from denial to anger to like you're going to jump all over.
The
It's not
stages don't
linear.
look like they don't just go in, this nice little line. They go back and forth and up and down. And at some point, you realize you're out the other side to some degree.
Right. Okay, so let me come back to my
Yeah. No,
metaphor,
your
which is
metaphor. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
no, it's okay. Which is that what have been coming to see is that so many of us trainers, facilitators, coaches and I'm talking about coaches inside of a seminar kind of company like the one I
Yeah.
was in, which is different than personal one-to-one coaching. But so many of us, we learn that those methods, those tools, those things, right? But what they don't teach us, and sometimes maybe don't even know themselves, I don't know, they don't teach us the side effects.
Mm,
So it's like, I keep telling people, I said, imagine going to a doctor and they give you this medication for this condition or this thing that you're dealing with, but they don't tell you about the potential side effects. That's what's happening in the self-help industry.
yeah.
That everybody's got their thing and their thing may have some good and valuable use, but they're not dealing with the side effects or that it doesn't work under these conditions in these
Right.
ways, right?
Right.
And there's a tiny bit of it in Landmark. I can hear my Landmark people. I always have the rebut in my head because I was the one who was in charge of rebutting for a long time.
You've got a strong neural pathway connection to, but wait a
Uh,
minute.
It's getting weaker, thank God, but it pops up at the weirdest times, which it just did, which is you would just say, right away, like, no, we warn people like to use these tools only on yourself and don't use them on others. So there's a few little kind of warnings in there, but there's not like, sometimes there isn't getting complete isn't the thing, or sometimes we'll get into the cliches later, but like the stories I've heard over the last 2 years of the ways in which really good ideas that can cause transformation and breakthrough have been used to also manipulate, control, and harm have been shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, for the first year, I think I was just in shock. I'm on year 2. My book will have been out in about 2 weeks. It'll be 2 years. Now I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, like who knew? Look, I was highly trained. I worked with the top dogs and senior
It's
people. And even in the well-being division, I have more well-being training than the average leader at Landmark. I promise you, because I worked in the well-being division and we did actually get some awareness,
got some
certainly
trauma.
around mental health issues.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say
Well,
we ever got trauma informed, but
there's this to me, there's such a difference between having people sign a consent form, that's different than because of how the brain works, because of coercive control, because of how we defer to hierarchy, all of these aspects that may come down to the human prime directive to belong. So it's one thing if you're going to come into a seminar and I'm like, well, here, sign this thing because here's all the things that could go wrong, right? Okay, but I really
But
want to.
let's be clear, those aren't on those
And
forms.
they're not even on there. Okay, so
Those
that
are
would
on the
be.
forms for your doctor's office and maybe your any where there's a professional accountability structure and where there's an actual understanding of informed consent. Informed is an important part of that term.
And what does it, and I guess where I was going with that is, what does it mean to be informed? So ideally, yes, you have that. But even then, you always have to, in my experience, you always have to remind people. You have to remind people. And I've been working as a professional coach since 2001. We can talk more about what does coaching mean, the way that
We're
I
getting there.
see it versus the way it's used in like organizations.
Landmark or
Landmark,
yeah, similar group.
this is very different. But, I consistently, even though I may have had a very upfront conversation about choice and autonomy at the very beginning of a coaching interaction, the brain can default to going with the dominant energy, going with the person who feels like they know more. Even though I may say to you, Anne, I am not above you. This is not a hierarchical thing. I don't know more. My job is to help you discover what you want, what's inside, all of that. I can say that, but I need to remind you of that. And so if there's something coming up that I might want you to do that might be a little more unusual, or maybe it's just we're in a tender area, I'm going to check back in and I'm going to remind you in that moment that you have choice. How does it feel? Does it feel like this is within your, like your nervous system? Do you want to keep going with this or not? Because especially people who've been through any kind of trauma, especially childhood trauma, often will defer to the authority. And even if I don't want to show up as an authority, I'm still put in the position of being an authority. And so I have to remind you, I'm not your authority. You are your authority. What's your body telling you about whether we should continue to pursue this topic right now or not? Because I want to train you and remind you that it is up to you.
Beautiful. None of what Ann just said would be said in a large group awareness training, for the record. So, because they don't ask questions, they give answers. So, and sometimes they ask questions, but they're almost always leading questions. There
They're
is an
designed.
answer to get to.
Yeah, we're going to a certain place. So I'm going to ask this question. And it's funny because, so I teach as well as coach, but, so I'm very aware of this as a teacher. If I'm trying to get to an answer, I will say to the group, by the way, I'm just asking because I actually really want to know what you think about this. Like, let's really talk about it. Or I could say, they have a right answer in mind. So,
Yeah, which
who got
then,
that?
yeah, which then lets the listeners know. I want to just touch on one thing back about the informed consent, because I just think that that's a really, people don't realize this. So, those annoying, like I go to Costco as my pharmacy, right? And I go to Costco and they like give you this like 5-page document with the medication, right? And it has what the medication does, what are the side effects, what are the things to watch out for. If I were going to have a procedure with a doctor, they have to let me know what could potentially go wrong with that procedure and so on before I consent.
Before you consent. And the other thing I will say about that, and I guess this depends on how good your healthcare is, but I just went through a major health issue over the last 18 months, and I had some major procedures done. I'm doing great, by the way. And it not only was it written, they told me what was there in the writing. They paused to see if I had any questions, and then they reminded me. Usually I would have to consent 2 or 3 times if it were something that was really big, right? We're not
Right.
talking just like a blood draw or something like that, but something fairly big. And I went through some big procedures. I had a great team. They would make sure that I really understood it, even to the point where
Yeah, it's
sometimes
not just, did you check the box, I accept these
no, and
terms
I'd
and
be like,
conditions. It's like you're actually making sure.
"Are you
And
trying?" I'd be like, "Are you trying to scare me?" Like, and they'd be like, "No, we just really want you to know, like, this is all of the things." And they'd be like, "Okay, well, let's talk about this. And what if that happens? Here's what we'll do. If that happens, then here's how we address it." And I think this maybe gets to this question of what is coaching as I know it versus the way it gets thrown around in seminar companies. It's a very, for me, like my medical care, I can't say enough good about them. It was an incredibly collaborative process
well, and what
ongoingly.
gets collapsed too, folks, is like if you go to, I'm just going to use Landmark because that's the one I have direct experience with.
Right, me
Sorry,
too.
guys. I have to keep talking about you because you kept me for 30 years and I don't have any other
Now you
experience.
can be mad at me because
Yeah.
I have that background
So,
too.
so that, but the things that they inform you about, which is like, I recently got all my forms that I signed when I did different programs. And there is a warning in there. If you have bipolar disorder, or if you have this, or if you have that, there is some mental health conditions. But here's the thing, they're informed consent forms, and that's important. Kudos to them. I'm not criticizing that. That's a good thing. But they tend to be the things that they have gotten in trouble for. So
Mhm.
their informed consent, or they're asking you, they're telling you about the things they know. Now, they know in part because something bad probably happened, or a professional has, a health professional in that field, mental health field, has told them. Large group awareness trainings are definitely not recommended for people with any kind of manic
Any kind of
depressive
mania
disorder,
because it'll
any kind of mania. Well,
turn
yeah,
on
because
the
it's
mania. It can, yeah,
the
absolutely.
experience is hypomania. So that's another thing to watch out for, is like that. There's two things. One is what they're informing you about tend to be a little bit more about their defense than your safety.
It's more cover your butt, and it's also what I remember now this was a long time ago. For context, I participated in Landmark from about age 18 to about age 27, and I'm not anywhere near those ages anymore, so this is a while ago. But
Right.
what was also clear to me at the time, and I've seen it in other organizations, is there's a difference between somebody who's paying attention to this and conferring with the lawyer, and we need to be careful of all of these, and the leaders really understanding it. Because there's a lot of things that can happen that are not to that extreme. And I'm going to give you an example of something I saw not at Landmark. This was in a different leadership program. And I saw a young woman be put in the middle of the group, the circle, about
Mm.
25 people, and I saw her be put there. And then the leaders told everyone else in the group to turn their backs to her. And they were trying to get her to see that she didn't have a very positive impact on people. First of all, I did not think that was accurate. And the other thing that I came to know, because I came to know this young woman, was that she'd had a lot of trauma in her life, a lot. And so this was just, she wasn't trying to be, non-compliant. She wasn't trying to be a problem. She was often in groups acting out of some unhealed trauma. And what did this do? Oh my God, it
Activated it.
traumatized her. It was damaging. It was horrifying to watch that. And the reason that I bring that up is that the leaders just didn't have any understanding of trauma, how people typically act, to have any sensitivity or any compassion. And they were just, it was sort of like, all human beings are kind of the same, and
That's
right?
the basis, is that whatever the ideas that that particular company or coach or whatever is working from, tend to be like, this is it. And it's at the source of the being of human being. That's how it's in Landmark. So all that other stuff, trauma, that all comes after. By working at the source, we can work with all that. Like, that was sort of the mindset. So
Right.
you're touching on another really key piece, which is the lack of trauma awareness and trauma
Oh my
informed.
God. Yes.
Now that's a pretty, let's acknowledge, I always say to acknowledge when it's not like, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, that wasn't the thing, people, unless you were a soldier. it was in the field of soldiers, but it
And
wasn't,
even
or in mental
yeah,
health professionals. But I'm just saying in the general discourse of society, it wasn't
yeah,
a
I think
regular
that's right.
thing, right?
I
It's
think that's
been
right.
more, I mean, as a daughter with complex trauma and, I've been walking beside her through that for 13 years now. And for the first 5 years, even the health professionals couldn't tell me what was going on,
Right.
right? Like they didn't know. And this is the other thing that kind of dovetails with consent. And then we'll go on to the coach thing, which is because something really popped in for me as we were talking about this, which is in these seminar or group kind of settings, all the consent is up front. And then once you're in the room and the doors are closed,
And do
you're
whatever
ours
you
and
want.
anything goes.
Anything
So
goes.
when you were talking about, like, you have to remind people, even just in an hour-long, coaching conversation, let's say, you have to continually be putting that in. I wouldn't say that's something that's a general practice in most seminar or facilitated transformational
Right. And
breakthrough kind of programs. It's like,
and
no,
they
no, maybe on the first day, like those first 3 or 4
right.
hours,
We're not gonna
but
and
then, mm-mm.
here's what I would say about that. So 2 things. One is, yes, I think it's fair to say we have as a society become somewhat more trauma informed in the last 5 years in particular.
Right.
That where,
That's dramatic.
sort of actually this thing that I'm referring to was not 20 years ago. But
Yeah.
I think we've gotten a little better at that. The other thing about, checking in, it's also true. You don't have to check in with everything, right? It's not like no, if you feel okay, get up and move your chair. It's kind of not like that, but it's being aware that there are things that can be activating for people. And if you're going to lead groups, you know, it's one thing if you're just a human on the planet and you accidentally say the wrong thing and, somebody's like, turtles are really traumatizing for me because I had my father killed my turtle. You're like, how are you
Or
going to
I had this happen one time, dropped a book, and somebody in the course was a vet who had been in combat, and they like jumped up out of their chair because somebody dropped, one of the books in the back, like that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
you do your best.
Right.
But there are things that are classically, even a little bit of trauma awareness should have you at least be somewhat sensitive. And there are things like checking in with your body. That can be very activating for people who have needed to cut off body sensations because they were physically abused, sexually abused. What else?
I was working with one of my clients who's a good facilitator, good teacher, very well known in the relationship field. She came to one of our I did these goddess getaways. And anyway, she was leading these wonderful meditations and circle practices. But my daughter, could not be in the room when a meditation was going on.
Yeah.
She just couldn't even be in the room. She couldn't
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah, there's some good, and the meditation field has actually done some good work around this. And if you're a practitioner and you want to know what to do, you want to calibrate toward really leaning into giving people choice because that will calm down their nervous system response if they feel like they're in control, because generally trauma and abuse happen and the person gets taken out of their agency. And so
Mm,
you give them the agency back and you say things like, if you want to do a meditation, you give people absolute choices. So, okay, we're going to do a guided meditation now. If it feels okay, you can close your eyes. You don't have to. If this doesn't feel okay to you, then don't do it. Just journal, do something else. You're totally fine. But we have to be aware of that as human beings, we are very relational. We survive with each other. So anything that puts the person on the spot, makes them feel like, because the truth of the matter is anybody could keep their eyes open during a meditation. I don't have a gun to your head, but I need to make it okay in the community so that you really know you can do this in the way that works for you and you are still part of the us. And I think
mm,
this was what was nobody, like when I give this example of this young woman, nobody hit her, nobody told her she couldn't leave, but it was coercively controlling because she was part of a community that had a community
right.
identity. And so the only way to maintain your identity in that community is do what the leaders are telling you. And if they don't give you any choice or come up with some weird ass idea that's going to
Right.
create a breakthrough, that we're not processing it as I'm an autonomous human being and maybe I will and maybe that doesn't feel good. We are processing it as I need to stay connected to these people. Whether it's rational or not, my brain on some level is telling me this, my very survival depends on this.
Right.
So
Well, and a little around so consent, whatever level of consent has been given at the beginning, and then that's wielded a little bit as a weapon, like
right.
you gave your consent. You chose to be here. We gave
Yeah.
you the opportunity to leave. That's a process in landmark, right? So you go through whatever on your way in, and then you get in the room and there's like they go through the rules, the ground rules, and this and that, and this and that, and this and that. And then you have a opportunity to choose to leave. And you usually go on a break. And if you don't want to come back, now knowing everything about how the weekend's going to go, you can give your name
Here's
tag. But you're already in social pressure.
right.
Your reputation's already at risk. There's all kinds of
Your
things that are
financial,
already in play.
everything. And then I also think
Sunk
about
cost fallacy, like all this
right.
stuff's in play.
And there's also this, I think about I was just listening to a little bit culty and Sarah Edmondson, and this whole they were having this conversation about consent and
Yeah,
staying all of this. And she always says so well, I didn't consent to that. And I
that's
think
right.
this also like we're not gonna tell you everything that could happen because it's for a couple of reasons. One, it's proprietary. We're not
Mm,
going to tell you how this is all going to play out. Two, we know there's things you wouldn't consent to, like being called names and being shamed in front of. So, Anne, you're going to do this seminar. How do you feel about being shamed in front of 100 other people for how your body looks? Because that's what we're going to do. Could you consent to that or do you want to leave right now? And then social
exactly.
pressure, you're not getting you're not actually being informed of everything that can happen and how you might feel. So what are you really consenting to?
Well, and that's what when the various AIDS employees, what they call the Werner employees, started coming to me and kind of going like, oh, well, and they were very elusive at first. I'm like, are you saying he physically puts his hands on you? Like, if that's what you're
Please.
saying, this is my answer to your question. But I remember then after this, a few came to me and actually like said what in plain language, what was really going on, which literally I cried through the whole conversation.
First.
And then but I remember saying later to one of them, I said, "But we were kinda always led like that was training and that you consented." This is before I understood consent really, or abuse, or assault, or domestic slavery, or any of these things I'm now really familiar with. And because the narrative, the rationalization that I was handed for the harsh, abusive words and things that I heard and saw was that they agreed to this like militaristic, heavy, intense, ruthless compassion level of training. And they know that it's going to be harsh and they know all this stuff. So I asked them, I said, is that true? Is that true? And they said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
There's no, not at all. They find out when they're there in the environment, in the work environment, which also in that case happens to be a work and home environment. And they hear crashing and banging going on in the other room and they're frozen. And then they're told by one of the other staff members or by one of the other senior people what's really going on and why not to worry. They're fed a rationalization, which in a moment of shock is like relief. Of course, you're going to grab a hold of that rationalization because talk about thought stopping, right? You're like, in the moment, you're frozen. So,
Because it's
anyway.
just as distressing, and this is I think about the research on childhood trauma, and one of the markers for childhood trauma, one of the adverse childhood experiences, if you do if you look to that for childhood trauma, which is excellent work,
Mm,
one of the markers has to do with what you witnessed, not just what was directed at you. So and I can't remember how it's worded, but if you were in your parents, one parent was being very abusive to another parent, that's trauma to you as a child. It does not have to be directed at the child, it's in the environment. And that's traumatizing. And I think I'm hoping that, like the legal system starts, catching up with this. But I work with people who are recovering from trauma. It's part of what I do. It's, labor of love. And sometimes I'll have somebody say, well, I'm staying with this abuser because it's better for the kids. And I'm just like, no,
No,
that's
it's not.
traumatizing for the kid. Well, he never hits them. He's really not, he's a great dad. I'm like, a great dad doesn't hit the mom.
I was like that with my daughter. I found out, now I didn't find out till quite a bit after we'd separated, but that my ex-husband, my previous husband, my current husband's fabulous, but
I'm glad.
my previous husband was physically abusive to my son, his stepson. And I knew that he was verbally abusive and kind of cruel, but I would later learn about like him
Yeah.
actually pinning him down and punching him and things like that. But I still never occurred to me that giving him so much time with my daughter could be dangerous to her because he was such a good daddy to his daughter.
Right. Except for,
And then how
no,
he was with me, I'm very good friends with his other ex-wife. Anyway, she's fabulous. And we compared a lot of notes, and how he was with us as the wives, as the women, never occurred to me that he would be some of those same behaviors with my 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old daughter, because he spent a lot of time with her in that period. When I first started leading at Landmark, he had her every weekend.
right.
That's where that's where her trauma comes from, is, that, and then I just wasn't there, which
And
also
you being
contributed to her
not
trauma.
being
Yeah.
available. But yeah, and they can be, great and attentive and warm and never say a mean thing to the kid. But if the kid is witnessing abuse of the partner or someone else in there, has a negative impact on their nervous system. And it's also a mind fuck, right?
Or abuse, if they're witnessing, in my daughter's case, more she witnessed his abuse of himself, his drug abuse,
Oh
there was a
yeah,
whole period of time
that's
I didn't even.
another marker, you know.
Yeah, it was
For
all that. All right, okay, so this is exactly, folks, by the way, how it goes when Ann and I start talking, and it's
yeah.
all over the place
Okay.
and all
So
kinds
you
of
wanna
juicy
ask
stuff.
me
Well, I
about
did wanna ask you the specific thing about in the seminar kind of environment, so mine is Landmark, but I've heard this in other ones as well.
yep,
You need coaching. Get coached. There's a whole thing about coaching. I'm gonna coach you now. So you might have somebody up at the mic, and all of a sudden, I'm gonna coach you. Okay, are you okay? And might be a place you might get consent. I've heard this before. Are you okay if I coach you about that? Okay, now I would listen to that in the Landmark environment, like warning you're about to be attacked.
you're about
You're
to be
about to
mani
be abused or manipulated.
yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about the difference. Like, what is healthy coaching? We're on
Well,
the line here. So we got healthy coaching and we've got harmful coaching. So let's look at that a little bit.
we've got this term that anybody can use, so there's no legal definition of it.
Right.
And in most of the United States, I think all of the United States, I mean, in much of the world, it depends, but in certainly most of the US and Canada, you can't call yourself a therapist unless you actually are a therapist. And you actually generally have to have a minimum of a master's degree. You have to have, various things in place to be able to say, I am a therapist. I cannot call myself a therapist. I am not trained as a therapist. Anybody can call themselves a coach. And have their own internal or organizational understanding of what that means. Now, we do have some governing bodies in the field. One of the main ones is the International Coaching Federation. There's a few others. There's some in Europe, different ones. They're probably the big gorilla player. And they have set out, basically saying, here's what we mean by professional coaching. And here are the kind of competencies you need to demonstrate if you're going to hold a credential from our organization, which I really like because I think it does provide a bit of protection against, if somebody says, I'm a coach, the first question I might ask them is, well, where is your training? you know
Mhm.
and 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 then sometimes there are people where they just have really good life experience and they get it, and that can happen. But all too often, I will have somebody who doesn't have a background go, "Oh, I just been coaching my whole life," and you're like,
Right.
"But is it what I understand as coaching, or is it something else? Do you really, I coach people to do this or that?" And it's kind of like the minute you pair the words, "I coach someone to,"
There's the
that
red flag, folks.
it's a little bit of a
Red,
pinch for me.
you're always talking about red flags, green flags, right? So you know what side of the line you're on.
Yeah.
So,
It's at least I'm gonna listen a little more carefully, and so the way that I think about professional coaching, and again, I have been a professional coach. I coach people from every layer of organization, every walk of life. I've been doing this a long time, young adults, series, CEOs, whatever. The way that I think of it is it's a partnership of discovery for the sake of my client, for the sake of what they want, who they are. And I am a partner in them discovering what they have within. And it is not my job to coach them to do something
okay.
unless what's happening is they're discovering what they want, and then we're looking for strategies to achieve that. But it's not me having the idea. If somebody says you need to be coached, how I hear that is you need to be changed, or you need to be
Mm,
controlled, or you need to learn how to comply.
interesting. Okay, so let's look at this a little bit because what I can hear is oftentimes in large group awareness trainings or programic transformational or breakthrough seminars, whatever we want to, whatever name people give them, this week is, if you're the person at the mic, right? So usually the leader's on the stage or some kind of raised platform and then, or the front of the room, whatever. And then there's the microphone and the person's in front of the group. And I'm just setting that stage because
Yeah,
the
yeah, I get you.
setting has a lot to do with what's happening for the person. And if somebody says in that setting, okay, I'm going to coach you, are you okay with me coaching you? And a lot of times this will have come up when somebody is questioning an idea that's been presented in the program. So, I don't have this is a term of a
I don't
landmark
have a
term. I don't
racket.
have a racket,
I
right? Which
don't
you can look at
know.
their website, landmark, whatever education to whatever it is now, landmark.com, look up what racket means in their world. It actually comes from a therapeutic background, but we'll save that for another
Like, I'm
discussion.
running a racket. I've got, like, a
Yeah, so I'm gonna
methodology.
coach you
Yeah.
in that environment. What I'm kind of getting from what you're saying becomes code for I'm gonna lead you to the answer. I'm gonna
Yeah,
lead you, but here's what we would say in Landmark. I'm not gonna lead you. I'm gonna have you discover my answer for yourself. That's really what's going on. I'm gonna
and
have you discover my answer for you.
as a
I just
professional
got that
coach,
actually. I'm like,
yeah, one of the things that is, I've taught coaching at every level. I now teach this advanced class that Ann is talking about. But one of the things that I would see that would get in the way of people actually getting a certification, like there are tests to take along the way, of like, yes, you pass the certification for this level of professional coach. And probably the main thing that would get in the way is the coach would not be able to let go of their own agenda. They wouldn't let they wouldn't be able to let go of their own bright ideas. And what we know from a neuroscience perspective is my ideas light up my brain, not yours. You need,
mm,
and the other thing, like, I'm trying to think, there might be a situation where I might coach someone in a big group. Generally, I would only do that as a demo to demonstrate a particular style of coaching. I did this with a class
but
last
you would
night.
set that up differently. So I'm thinking
Totally.
of the choice exercise, for example, that
Yeah.
they do in the forum where they have somebody up front, vanilla chocolate, choose back and forth, which has a whole load of problems we'll
So
handle in
that's a big
another thing.
that's
So off. But it is see, the thing about so many of these groups is this idea that I'm going to find a way to educate you or train you or and this was at the foundation of the whole est, like, to me this is what est brought about was later we called it discovering for yourself, but I'm going to have you experience something and then whatever comes out of that experience, that's your transformation. Except for it's been so curated, so constructed and led and through some of these techniques that it's the insight you have about your life might be original, but the process is very constructed and then that's the medicine that then gets taken without warning.
and what I'm looking for as a leader is I'm looking for the examples that lead us to a predetermined end.
Hmm.
And if I am working with someone in a truly professional coaching relationship, I do not have a predetermined end. I'm a servant of what emerges between us. And even if they come to me and they say, here are my goals for coaching, I'm going to hold those with honor and integrity. Like, okay, this is what you're telling me you want. But I'm also going to be very open and flexible as new things emerge. And so I'll give you an example of this. I had a client come to me and she'd like, I want to, she was actually a coach. And so I want to be successful in this manner of coaching, in this field. I want to, be able to get into executive coaching. And, as we talked, and the more we talked, what was lighting her up were softer methods than where she had kind of pointed herself in terms of her beliefs about what, a successful coach was. And so I'm kind of doing this really interesting dance where, on the one hand, I know what you said you wanted. On the other hand, I'm hearing different things from your system, from where your energy lights up or goes down. And I'm going to keep questioning that. And questioning, I mean, sort of bottom line is, this is where we started. Is that still what you want? What is emerging for you now? And part of my job is to go with the client's energy in terms of how they are emerging. And as we get more awareness and insight, often our motivations and our goals change. So I don't have a goal that she has to do this or that.
Right.
I don't care. I want to be of service to whatever is emerging for her as a client.
Well, it's really interesting because I kind of went off the main landmark leader track, centers division, it's called in that ecosystem, and went over to this wisdom area. Well, the main thing that was different, and my trainers, my mentors had to kind of like reprogram me a little bit because I was, in the leadership program that I had coached and led, and the main, it's called the Introduction Leaders Program. It's like the core leadership, starter leadership program, and then self-expression in leadership, which was about community and so on. But I was more in the traditional landmark-esque style, and then I come over into this other area, and it's for only senior graduates. But we come from an incredibly different basis, which is you present ideas, ask questions, and you follow where the participant goes. You're not, and my trainers had to like train out of me trying to
You
get
have to
people to
unlearn.
get something.
Yep.
And which is why I think when I kind of came back into the other approach, I was like, wow, that's kind of weird, but I didn't think it was invalid. I just thought I was like, I kind of like the other one. And the work that I do now with the Ridwan School and the Diamond approach, it is all just pure inquiry. There's never a answer. In fact, sometimes you're a little like, could you give me the answer, please?
Could I have an answer?
Right.
Yeah, and that would more fit the partnership exploration where one person in the partnership, where it's different
Yeah.
from a friendship is it's for the sake of one person in the partnership, not both, right?
Excellent point. Okay. Yeah.
It's not an equal time thing. And generally, the energy exchange is you're paying me and I'm focused on you. That's kind
Right.
of how it goes. Right. And that's the energy exchange. It's not like now it's my turn. That doesn't work. Uh, we are going to be partners for the sake of your growth and your goals as defined by you. And what I'm going to do is bring in like, it's kind of, maybe the metaphor, I don't know if this is a good one or not, but it just popped in my head. Like you're building a house right now.
Right.
And it's sort of like nobody's going to tell you what kind of house to build. That's up to you. You get to decide, we want this many bedrooms. That's you, your choice. You're paying for that. But you need to hire people who are kind of like, yeah, I could put the stairs over here. I think that'll work. And that's, that like a coach is kind of more like that architect or that builder who can bring the tools in and the expertise to help you get the kind of house you want. And I know you've had some challenges with your builders, so this might not be the greatest.
No, it's
But
great. Well, the other part you're
ideally,
speaking to though, but to the challenges, right? So as we're building this house and then things happen like, oh, we're going to be able to lift the panels up onto the second floor with this piece of equipment, but that piece of equipment won't work because the land topography is like this. And so now we have to we have to be resilient. We have to look for the different
Right.
tools and the different approaches.
Right.
And what happens in these groups a lot is there aren't different tools or different
Right.
approaches.
It's
The
just
point is, this is the tool, and whatever situation you're going to bring, I'm going to bring this tool.
and
And
you
yeah,
can't work with that tool. It's not that, the land won't allow it or the system won't allow it. It's that you are damaged and broken.
mm, okay.
It's back to this and, in terms of language, this idea you're 100% responsible, you're creating your reality, all of that. So if something happens, like with this young woman, I don't actually think that's a good idea to do to anybody, by the way, to put them in a group and have the group turn their back. But it was
Almost all those processes are
yeah,
not
that would be
healthy.
pretty bad, but it was particularly bad for her, right? And so but the fact that it didn't work for her was never seen as a problem with the process. It was seen as she's really a damaged human. We're just doing these things that call you forth, and challenge you and, ruthless compassion and, all of that, rather than saying, no, that's actually the wrong tool for this situation and for that human being.
That's the key, what you just said. This situation and that human being. The both have to be considered. And so much I mean, just speak as one, we're not trained very well in that. I mean, I thank God for Margie Parrott every day, who was, shout out to Margie. She's passed on now. So she's listening from heaven, because she is for sure there, who was so great. She taught me a lot about psychology. We didn't really call it that, but she really did teach me how to recognize in people's work if maybe they'd had abuse in their past, how
Yeah.
to recognize if somebody had trauma, although I can't remember, we didn't really use that word, but like, and I'm so grateful every day. I mean, that's the reason why I think I'm not spending a lot of time on the phone, making amends, honestly,
Yeah.
because I could have so easily, and maybe I did somewhere and I don't know about it. If anybody's out there listening and anything I did, we had an
Just ready to
interaction that was
make
harmful,
amends if you
I
screwed you
am
up.
so sorry. And I'm ready to hear, I'm willing to hear what that is. But even if it wasn't me, I've been listening for 2 years from the harms of the company that I had devoted most of my adult career and life to. And it's been hard. It's been hard to hear all that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to hear that. I didn't know that was there. It came out about flow out of my book. Just one thing, because I really want to get it in, and then we're going to wrap up this section. Because I wrote it down because it really occurred to me. Another way that coaching gets framed in these networks is inside of as a comparison to athletics. So I've
Mm,
told the story a lot about Werner referred to military, like the drill sergeant, right?
good
It's life
story.
or death. I'm going to
And
get in your face. Da, 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 da,
didn't he
da.
have a favorite movie that
Yeah,
everybody
Full Metal Jacket. Yeah, Full Metal Jacket.
tell me you're a narcissist and a psychopath without telling me you're a narcissist and a psychopath?
My God, where were you 10 years ago? Yeah, no, I didn't see that at all. But in the inside, kind of down one level of pain and torture from that is athletics, because the idea is that in athlete, and I've heard this analogy used for coach a lot. Well, by coach, I mean like an athletic coach who's going to actually, or a yoga. I worked for a big yoga guru, worked with him and learned all about assisting with body posture. And the assistant is going to come along and move your foot this way. And as he was training yoga teachers, he would have to tell them how to call out commands so that it would get the right thing. And that's often thought of as a form of coaching also. And I've heard that used like for that person that's standing at the microphone. Okay, now I'm going to go into coaching you, which means I'm going to tell you, even if I'm asking it in the form of a question, I'm like telling you how to, how to
But
think is what's happening
again,
there.
I have an agenda, which is maybe it's my view of peak
Yeah.
performance or, especially if I'm doing something that is mechanical, like body posture. It's
Mhm.
mechanical. There's a way of, if you're playing tennis, there's a way of hitting the ball that if you keep doing that, you're going to give yourself a rotator cuff injury. Right. Or if you're doing yoga and doing it in the wrong way, you may be you're going to
And injure
you're going to
yourself.
kind of through neuroplasticity and habituation, you may wire in something that's going to cause you pain. So it's really different than emotionally having this agenda, but it is unfortunate. I mean, I wish there was another word that didn't have any relationship to anything else and we could just really claim because coaching did, when it emerged 30 plus years ago, around then, there just wasn't another word. And so we co opted it from athletics, basically.
That's
But
great. That's a
it's
great
different.
insight.
Yeah,
Yeah, like, we co-opted it from athletics and then tried to put it in business because that's where the money is, folks. That's why everybody's trying to coach in business. So, because businesses will spend money on coaching more readily and at a higher level than individuals. So, but you're trying to kinda coach like, I'm seeing here that context really does matter, and I'm using context in the way that it's actually defined, not the crazy way Landmark defines it,
I don't even
which
know
is
how
environment,
people, yeah,
right?
I think of context as, your the swimming pool you're in, the
Yeah,
water
it's one
that.
of the words they've kind of co-opted. But if I'm on like, we just had the Olympics. So if I'm on the ice skating rink and I'm a ice skater and I'm trying to learn how to do a triple axel, that's a different kind of coaching than if I'm standing at the microphone working through some issue in my relationship with my husband or in my performance in work, right? So that's really good what you're
Well,
saying
there
about
isn't an
everybody had
answer,
different.
and I love this because I wanna say the young woman with the stripy hair who just won the gold medal, Alyssa, I think is her
Yeah,
name.
I don't
Is it
know.
Alyssa?
I canceled my cable, so I have to
Oh, well,
my daughter gave me her Peacock number so I could break
I
in and
just
go
watch
watch.
her
I haven't
on
watched
YouTube.
yet.
I just watch her on YouTube because she's a freaking,
I gotta go watch.
star, and not just because she's a good skater, but because she used her coach for both. How do I do like, you can watch her, like, okay, if like, there's this great scene in a YouTube video that I saw where she's like, the coach is saying, "Yeah, that line, do this and that line." She's like, "Yeah, but isn't that a little awkward with this line? What if I did this?" And so she's engaging with her coach in this incredibly collaborative way
Mm,
that is high, won her a gold medal. And she also said, "I do not want anyone to tell me what to do, what to wear, what to eat. I'm done with that. I want to skate for the sheer joy of it." And her
beautiful.
coach and her choreographer, I have to say, I don't know much about them, but it seems like they came along with open hearts. And they were like, "We will do that with you. We will empower you in that way." And it is beautiful to watch this part, like, to me, that's sports coaching as a partnership. It's
Well,
gorgeous.
that's I think you're pointing to another and this is a aspect we talk about a lot inside of the safe seeking work that I'm doing with Seek Safely, which is you wanna understand yourself and your aims and be able to interview your coaches, assess your programs for, is this the kind of approach or program that is healthy for me, that is effective for me and my learning style, right? So another thing we're starting to find out is we're starting beginning to understand neurodivergence more, is these kind of highly structured, highly rigorous programs are really attractive to people who are neurodivergent, but also very harmful
Very difficult for
because
them.
they take their agency away
Right. And they
and
take
they
their
yeah.
resonance away and their motivation, and I think about, you
When they
know
don't it's about conformity, not diversity.
Right,
So
right, right, which is sort of appealing if I kinda don't know what I should be doing in social relationships and things like that, or I'm all over the place and I don't know how to move forward, and so give me a formula, but that is actually, not, as you say, not what people
right.
necessarily need long term. But I think this there is a way safely. And so I work as a coach. I work with a lot of coaches. I work with other people too. And sometimes with other coaches, one of the things they want is they want some of the benefit of my experience. And having done this for 25 years, there's a bit of been there, done that. But I need to, as a safe practitioner, what I need to do is I need to say, okay, this is world according to Ann. In my context, in my personality, here is something that worked for me as I was building a business. And then I will usually ask them, is there anything about that that resonates for you? What do you see for yourself in that? So that they know they can say to me, I would never in a million years do that. And I can be like, great, all right.
Oh, that's such a great way to frame because I'm one who uses my personal experience a lot, in terms of I'm always teaching. And that I was
Right.
taught that in Landmark too, like to teach from your lived experience, right?
Good.
And
Yeah.
which has some value, but it also has some barriers because my lived experience is very distinct to me. And it's on me as the coach, as the practitioner, as the facilitator to recognize and make very clear to all those that I'm interacting with and listening that this may not match for you. And that's
No.
okay.
And
That's
it might
okay.
not fit your personality or it might be, like, God, that sounds really cool. I think I will try that, great, benefit from my mistakes, no problem. But I do not want to I don't think this is the problem is that there are, and this is true about, there's so many people out there selling formulas, whether it's a formula for how to be a realtor or
Yeah.
a
There's
formula
no
for how to,
formula for how to be a human being, don't we
oh
wish?
my
We
God,
keep try as we might.
no, and there's no formulas for building a successful business that will stand the test of time. There's who are you? So where I come from as a coach, and I do help people build businesses, but where I come from is what is a natural outflow of your personality, what you would do anyway, like how do we take that river of energy that is you and move it in a way that is productive rather than saying, well, if you want to build a coaching business, for example, you need a sales funnel and you need to do this big free offer and then you need to drill down and do all of this. Might work for some people, but for a lot of people, they just feel very constrained and then they get into this whole guilt and shame because they didn't do it right, all of that. Let's figure out what your energy is. How do we
Right.
maximize you? So
So great. You'll love. So along the way, I've always, I very frequently tell people like, oh, if you want some support with that or whatnot, I'm available. Call me or use me or whatever. And when I had inside of the Landmark system, I was responsible at one point, almost 200 people who were volunteers. And my job was to make sure that those people got 10 times more
right, I
value
remember that. You got 10 times more
than
value.
what they were giving. So, and I
In
took
fact,
that
I think you had
really
to
seriously.
promise that you would do that as a volunteer. I think you had to actually commit that you were gonna get more
Okay,
value.
well, I call myself a recovering codependent, but back then, no. I took it like all on me. And so I was always coaching people all the time. That was kind of my job, right? Was to like coach them and bring the distinctions of the ideas of the program I was leading, so on and so on. But anyway, so along the way, so then when I left that, I've had, usually I have 2 or 3 or 4 people along the way who have asked me to coach them. And I used to say, not actually qualified as a coach. This was like instinctual. I just want you to tell me you're proud of me. This is really the
I
truth.
am proud of you, but
So
now
I'd say like, well,
you're altering.
I'm not really a coach. Well, I'm not comfortable given where I taught, which is all about listening. I wasn't really comfortable telling people what to do. And trust me, I'm really smart and have lots of good ideas. So I'm happy to share my ideas, but I wasn't comfortable with that. So here's what one of my very, very first clients, so to speak, although she didn't pay, it was an exchange. But anyway, whatever. She said, I know. Cause I said, I don't really coach. I said, I'm more like the person who's going to be on your shoulder. And sometimes a lot of times I'm going to just listen and sometimes I'll reflect. And if you ask for an idea, maybe we'll do ideas or all kinds of different stuff. And she goes, you know what you are? She goes, you're an angel.
Oh,
So,
I
and she
love
bought me this
that.
beautiful, I have it in my room. I have this beautiful little ceramic angel. So that's how I used to say, I was like, when people come to me and say, will you coach me? I'm like, well, I won't coach you, but I will be the angel on your
Being the
shoulder.
angel on your shoulder. I love
Yeah.
that.
I loved it. And that's where I feel at home
Yeah.
with my 30 years of experience is because that is what I was trained in, really. So it's just been really that was a joy to like, and out of this conversation, I'm like, I'm taking that moniker back because I've had the blessing of being in Ann's class to actually get some coaching training. So, and it's been such a blessing and so great and so fabulous, but I've still been really wrestling with, do I really want to be a coach? I definitely have my imposter syndrome stuff going on, but it's more about I like that angel mode a lot better. And I do have a handful of clients right now. And I tell them, I'm like, look, what we're going to work on is somebody came to me and said, I want an accountability coach. I said, well, that's not me. I'm not really, I just spent 30 years in an intense accountability environment. I'm in recovery from accountability coaching.
It's not what you really want to do. Yeah.
I said, that's not really me, but why don't you tell me what is it you're dealing with and what is it really that, you're looking for? Like, I said, I'm happy to listen. I'll refer you to whoever. And as she told me, I said, gosh, it sounds to me like you just really need somebody to walk beside you
Yeah.
and listen and help you find the right resources. And I just, you're doing a lot of really big health stuff. And you need somebody who's going to help you sort through all the morass. And it sounds like you've had some real painful things happen. Maybe there's some healing that needs to happen. And so you don't really need accountability. I think you need somebody who's going to like give you a place to talk and sort and look with you. Anyway, it was great. She hired me for double what we were looking at.
Because I think sometimes people, they assume that that's what coaching is.
Right.
Coaching is about this, what are you going to do and when are you going to do it? And my experience has been sometimes, there is a role. I'm with you. I don't,
Well,
it's not,
that's very that athletics
it's,
lens,
yeah,
don't you think?
it's not my favorite role. It feels very masculine energy, not male necessarily, but like masculine energy. But what I have found more effective, and I know you know this as well, is that when I can have somebody really tap into their internal motivation, who they are, how this is a reflection of, the life that they really are dreaming of and all of that, and keep them connected to that, I don't have to hold their feet to the fire. They're on fire.
Right.
That's my job, not to be like, well, I don't know. You said you were going to make 3 sales calls this week and you only made 1. I'm not so sure if you're really committed to this process. That's just mean. Like, I just don't want
Right.
to do
Well,
that.
look, there may be a place and time for that, but it needs to be clear. Like that's kind of back to that informed consent, or the consent sort of thing. Like, is that because I have like one client where she's like, she goes, I need a place to say what I'm going to accomplish and then somebody to ask me next week if I did. That's different to me than managing somebody or giving somebody the direct,
Right.
go do
But
5 reps of this or whatever. I
exactly.
never was very athletic, so no worries, no
It's
reason.
very like that. But even with that person, what I would say, and I think you know this, if I have this person who's coming to me and saying, I just really do need a place where somebody's going to hold me accountable for my promises, absolutely start there. I'm not going to be mean about it, but we're going to be checking, and I always check in. But if what I'm starting to find is over the course of 3, 4, 5 sessions, they are consistently not doing anything that they are saying they want to do, that there's just no movement in the homework, we're going to go to some kind of deeper level,
Right.
because whatever's happening is not self-generating for them. What's that about? Maybe are you trying to make somebody else happy? Are you, is this a should? Is it a desire? Is it because you don't know how and you need to learn some skills? Or is it because you don't care? And how do we discover that and amp up, or take a new direction? So I'm going to be watching for the patterns as well as just holding somebody accountable.
Right.
Like I
That's really
never kept
that's
my word in Landmark. Never. Well, I mean, I did about certain things, but like in terms of enrollment, I would promise to bring guests. I would promise to do enrollments. I sucked at it. I was so bad that I never really enrolled much of anybody. I brought very few guests. I would always make those promises. The truth of the matter was I was not bought into that.
mm,
I didn't care about it enough to do it. But I would make all these promises and people would yell at me
well,
because
that's
it
the
was
price
wrong.
of admission. So
Right. I
you
wanted
have
to
to
belong.
be conform. Okay,
Exactly.
well, I think I'm gonna pause us
Okay.
right there because Ann and I could go on forever and ever and ever, but I think this has been a really useful conversation about particularly about this nuance of coaching. And, what I'm taking away from the conversation is that there are different kinds of coaching. I keep running into this where if we just add another word, we actually deal with a whole bunch of safety issues. So if we say, okay, I'm going to coach you in an athletic style, or we're going to be doing coaching that is aimed at mindset, just that simple practice when you're looking at coaching or working with somebody in a coaching environment, or when I'm interviewing a coach. Okay, well, tell me what coaching means to
Yeah.
you and what's your approach and what's your philosophy. And then don't hire that person or work with that person if there isn't resonance and if it isn't structured in a way that you can leave at any time.
Oh my God, that's also something. I do not believe in these $10,000 a month coaching packages that are going to
Mm,
give you
mm-mm.
a qualified professional coach ethically is not going to promise you results. So anybody also who comes into the coaching world and says, I can get, I'll get you making six figures. That's what we do. Or you're going to have this, or you're going to have that. Just do my program. Ethically, we're not supposed to promise actual results.
That is such, I'm gonna actually bookmark that because we might do a whole other episode about that. It's one of the biggest things I teach in the Safe Practitioner Workshop. Do not promise results, do not promise outcomes. And I just found out recently in both the medical profession, the legal profession, the psychological profession, like you said, there's a code of ethics
Yeah,
that says you cannot do
you
that and you
can't.
can lose your license over doing that.
Absolutely. You can't
Yeah,
tell somebody who's coming in for a divorce, oh, we're going to win and I'm going to get you X amount of spousal support. You can say, I will do my best. Here is my assessment of your situation. Here's what it looks like to me. But I can't promise anything other than who you can count on me being in the coaching process. I'll take you seriously. I won't tell your secrets to anybody else. I will show up on time. I will not hold you to a contract that doesn't feel right for you. I can make those promises.
right,
I can't promise what's going to happen for you. It's going to depend on what you do.
right. Yeah, such an important piece. All right.
All
Well,
right, I
Ann
got
and I
now.
are going to actually continue the conversation on my new Patreon channel, Beyond the Line. And for the month of March, all levels are open to
Woo!
everybody. But I'm invited Ann on because I want to, we're going to look at some of these kind of, they often get thought of as cliches or slogans, sayings, 100% responsible, that's your story, get complete. We're going to look at some of
That's your
these.
story. Oh, I've got something good to say about
Yeah,
that.
so we're
So
gonna
come
look
over
we're
to
gonna take those
Patreon because I
come
can't
over to
wait.
Patreon because we're gonna take apart some of those and talk about what's really going on there, and is it true or not true? Like, is that a thing or not a thing?
I love
So, thanks, folks, for joining us today on Confronting the Line, and thank you, Ann, and we will see you shortly.